You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 273. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Picture this. You step into your living room and you notice that there is a glass on the arm of the sofa. And the remote for the TV is on the floor. There's a pair of socks on the carpet next to the sofa and a few papers and maybe a novel. And you try to walk by, but you can't because your mind is focused on these things that are out of order. Now, on top of that, you're also carrying in your mind the events of the day. There are emails that you haven't responded to. There's that client where you had that awkward conversation and now you're trying to think about next steps. Maybe you're thinking about what to plan and eat for dinner. Is the food that you thought was in the fridge actually there, or did somebody eat it while you were out of the house? So what happens is we've got this internal narrative and it's always happening. And if what you find is that your work days, your home days, your life gets really full, really busy, especially if that happens all at once, the thoughts in your mind can feel overwhelming, right? And this happens in a professional context. It happens in a personal context. And the purpose of today's podcast episode is to offer you a system so that if and when you feel like that, and for me, this happens on the regular where everything happens. I'll give you a very recent example. And what it takes for me to feel good, to get peace of mind, is to organize my thoughts. It's to have a process so that I can take that jumbled mess in terms of what's happening internally and create some order externally. So if that's something that you can relate to, my guess is you've got some systems of your own, and hopefully listening to what I describe will be helpful to you. And it's a process I do for myself often. And I also find I walk lawyers through it. And what I love about that is that I get to see how sharing this structure, sharing this process can be helpful to others. So if we take a big step back, first off, I would invite you to think about when you have a situation where you feel disorganized, overwhelmed, like there's too much to do all at once, everything's calling at you at the same volume, and you're trying to figure out how to prioritize. And this can happen in multiple situations. I think probably the most classic example is when your workday or your work week just gets out of control, right? You show up on Monday morning and you expect one thing to happen. You've got a plan. You're going to write a brief. You have some emails to send. You've got maybe some filings due at the end of the week. And next thing you know, someone's in your office telling you about a file that came in over the weekend, an emergency that came up on something else. You've got the school calling because there's a surprise assembly on Wednesday. Can you be there? There's all these things. If you've got your kids with a caregiver, maybe something happens with the caregiver, they have family issues back in, maybe they're not from where you live and they've got to go home for a family visit. Now you're thinking, how do I organize childcare? I mean, these are the realities of what it's like to be a working professional parent, all of the things, and to have all these multiple priorities at the same time. And it can create a bit of a scramble. Even as I'm describing it, it feels like a brain scramble. So it happens in a busy week. It can happen more in an isolated way as well. So if you think about your email inbox, right? You might have a number of unresponded to emails and you're trying to figure out how to prioritize them. You might be thinking about inputs other than your email. I know for myself, I've got multiple email accounts that I monitor. There's also LinkedIn, and recently I'm on some WhatsApp threads. I can barely even say it because I barely use it on purpose because it's more ways to have inputs that you need to keep track of. So you might find that you just aren't keeping up with text messages, of course, voicemail, whatever, that you need to figure out like who actually has reached out to you that you need to respond to. It could happen trip planning. So for me, the reason this is so top of mind right now is I am planning a trip. I'm literally leaving in a few hours to go to Mexico City. I'm going there with my daughter first, and then my husband is joining us. Our son is staying home. He doesn't want to go on a trip. So we've kind of staggered our trip. It's all a bit nuanced and complicated. Long story short, yesterday we decided I would stay a few extra days with my husband and daughter. So now I am very much, in a meta example, I'm doing exactly what I'm trying to explain to you that I'm doing, which is, okay, the variables changed. I need to record this podcast episode before I leave today, which is what has motivated me to record early. Otherwise, I'd be doing this next week. So that is a shift. And also when planning a trip, this was relatively short notice. We've been planning it for about a week and a half. We'll be gone for about a week and a half. So I've just jumped in. And let me tell you, if you've never been to Mexico City, I had not realized how much there is to see and how incredible it is going to be to visit. I will absolutely fill you in when we get back. But going to the topic of today's episode, the amount of brain, I don't want to call it clutter, but it's all the information that kind of jumps into your brain all at once. And then you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I'm planning for the trip to the extent it's relevant to today's topic, which really is taking all those scattered thoughts, giving them structure through a process, and coming out at the other side with a peace of mind plan so that you can move forward without that sense of overwhelm and, oh my gosh, am I missing something? So other examples, when you're goal setting, that can be a time when it just feels like there's so much, right? If you think about the new year, for example, and you're trying to decide what my New Year's resolution goals are going to be, sometimes that can be overwhelming. You might have more than one thing you want to do. And so how do you figure that out? And then the last thing here might also be just projects, right? And this is where you might have a work project or something that you're doing outside of work where you just need to start thinking about, well, how am I going to structure this so that I can get this done over a period of time? And actually, I missed one here, which is difficult conversations. So if you are negotiating a salary increase, if you are negotiating boundaries at work, if there's something going on and you want to address it, these are all times where chances are there's a lot going on in your mind. And the question is, how do you translate the ingredients of your thoughts, let's say, and turn that into a beautiful quesadilla? That was the first Mexican item that came to mind, a beautiful quesadilla or a cake or whatever it is. How do we take the raw ingredients, which are the thoughts in your mind, and turn them into something that is actionable, tangible, and feels really clear to you? So this has come up for me in coaching conversations where a lawyer is about to have a difficult conversation, right? Whether it's with your practice group leader or somebody in management, and you just need someone to be a thought partner for you. This is a great example before a performance review, for example, or a conversation about maybe shifting practice areas or something's not really going the way you want it to. These are times where it's really helpful for someone to partner with you. So I do this with my clients, where we talk about, okay, what are all the things? How do we want to organize this? How do we want to approach this? And if it's for a conversation, for example, then we plan it out. So for you, you might be thinking about, okay, what is going on in your practice right now? What's going on outside of your practice? If you're listening to this episode when it goes live, we're going to be, mid-August. Summer is a crazy time, right? Especially if you've got kids who are dependent, at least in part, on you. The schedules are all over the map. Things are sometimes unpredictable. And so we want you to develop that skill of being able to take this jumble of information and turn it into something manageable and tangible. So why should we do this? Well, for me and for lawyers that I have worked with, I think number one, when you have a process to take all of the thoughts, all of the ideas and turn them into something actionable, it helps to reduce overwhelm, right? If you're sitting there and you've got a million thoughts racing through your mind and you don't have a system to deal with them, it can feel overwhelming and that can lead to inaction, right? You just don't know where to start, so you don't start at all. I've had to resist that temptation a number of times over the past few days because the volume of information I'm trying to process and organize feels quite heavy. And so there are times where I'm like, oh, I could just run off to the drugstore and do something random because that's going to sort of get me away from the planning. And I have done that, right? To take a break and go back to things. but also you want to be able to have the skills and a process in order to manage the information. So it reduces overwhelm. It increases that sense of control, right? So the more you feel like you're on top of the information, the more in control you're going to feel. It gives you an opportunity to sit down and plan. So what are you going to do? What is the recipe that you want to follow for your next steps? And with all of this comes that peace of mind, right? So there was a movie that came out years ago. I think it was called I Don't Know How She Does It. And Sarah Jessica Parker was the lead. I don't think I watched the full movie, but I remember watching what I think was the opening scene. Maybe I did watch it. It was a long time ago. Anyhow, the bottom line is that she's lying in bed next to her partner and she has these thought bubbles, all the things that she's supposed to be doing. It's like 2 a.m. and the thought bubbles are just forming. They're all on top of her head. Like, I don't know, sign the kids up for soccer, pay taxes, pick up carrots at the grocery store, whatever it happens to be. And I'm almost certain that you can relate to that, right? That feeling of like, okay, there's all these things happening. Peace of mind is when you can go to bed at night and all of those thought bubbles are accounted for, right? You've got a system, you've got a way that you're not worrying about those things. You have recorded them somewhere and you do not have to deal with them. So peace of mind ultimately is the goal here. So what is the process to deal with all of the scattered thoughts? I've broken it down into 3 steps and I'm keeping it simple. And I hope that for you, this gives you clarity. If you have a system already, this is a great chance to reflect on your system. My guess is you're doing some amazing work already. Are there any tweaks that you might make based on today's conversation, right? Maybe it's something that I say, or maybe it's something that I don't say, where you think, wait a second, this would actually be really helpful for me. So use this as an opportunity to think about your process. I'll tell you my process and you can decide how this might work for you. So number 1, if you are in this zone where you've got all the thoughts running around in your head, like an army of unregulated ants, this is what it feels like for me. It's just everything everywhere all at once. The first thing that I recommend doing is downloading all of those thoughts somewhere. Now, you can do this by hand on a piece of paper. I often do this. I create lists like they're going out of style because for me, this is a very calming process. The minute I see it on paper, I can relax. So for you, you might start there, right? Just taking a sheet of paper. I often use recycled paper. So if I've got leftover printed things where I've got a blank side, I use that. And that is just a place to download all the information. Now, there are limits to doing it by hand. There are also advantages. The advantages are, I think you get more time. You get to really process it. You engage more of your body. You're physically writing it. And so there's an opportunity for you to really internalize what it is that you are writing. But volume becomes an issue, right? The larger your list, the harder it is to deal with. And so this is where an electronic document comes in really handy. So if you want, you can open a blank Word document, you can open a blank email and do the same thing. You just want to write down everything that is on your mind. And what you'll probably find is that once you do that, you exhaust whatever resources you have internally. I don't mean that by exhaust as in tired, as in exhaust as in you realize there is actually a limit to the things that you're thinking about. It probably isn't as bad as it feels before you write it down and externalize it. So you really want to externalize it either in a written format, like handwritten format, or electronically. That is step 1. You just want to get everything out of your head and onto some sort of either an electronic document or a physical document. You might think about a closet or a kitchen drawer, some area in your house or even your office, right? Maybe it's that top drawer of your bureau where it's like just everything has just been kind of thrown in there, pens and erasers and notepads and whatever. You just want to take it all out so you can see it. Because when you can see it, then you can deal with it a lot more effectively. So that's step 1. You just want to get everything out. Step 2, and this is where it starts to get fun. And this is also where you're really starting to engage what you've probably already heard of, which is really being engaged here, which is your executive functioning skills. So I've talked about executive functioning skills on the podcast before. If you've never heard of them, then Google them and you'll see that they are the categories of skills that you engage in for the execution of tasks. So things like planning, organizing, prioritizing, time management, emotional regulation, task initiation, sticking to a task. These are all executive functioning skills. And so what we're doing here, right? We've emptied out the container of your mind. And now what we want to do is apply some of those skills to organize. And actually, if we go back to the unbundling or the sort of releasing from your mind and onto some external document, what you're using there is your working memory, right? Your working memory is what is holding on to all that information in your mind. It is one of your executive skills, and it's exhausting. If you're trying to keep all of this inside of your head, you are really taxing your brain. So there's a great incentive to simply free up your capacity by putting what you're holding onto in your mind, using your working memory, onto a piece of paper. I will often say to clients, don't use your brain as a storage locker. You want to use your brain for much more sophisticated transactions. So that is the real purpose behind step one, is let's just take everything out of your brain and put it somewhere where you can see it. You can now forget it, right? You've relieved that stress. So step two is where we're continuing then really the executive processing of the information, which is to organize it. And organizing comes next because what you're going to find is it's kind of like when you do the laundry, if you do your laundry, and believe me, I do more laundry than I would like to do. And lately, much less so because I've delegated out that task. But you can imagine a full laundry basket with everything in it and you dump it somewhere, maybe it's on your bed. And now you can start to see that there's categories, right? There might be socks that need to be paired up. There are shirts that need to be folded. There are towels to fold. There are dark colors, light colors. That's probably more at the sorting stage. But the idea here is when you look at that list, you're going to notice that there are categories or topics by which you can start to group the information. So if I use my trip to Mexico as an example, then it's very clear to me that there are categories like the very basics, right? The must-haves like flights, accommodation, passport validity, how I'm getting to the airport, how I'm getting back from the airport, transfers between the airport and the hotel, just very basic things. Then there are things like activities, right? Things that you need to register for in advance, certain museums, food tour, hot air balloon over the pyramids. Yes, very, very excited. So there are all these different things that are in sort of the, I really want to do these category things. And then there's the nice to haves. And so I'm not sure, we have a few things in that category, but it's really, what would I do if there was extra time? So if you're thinking about your week, now I do this weekly pretty much. I haven't been quite as regular in the summer just because my schedule has been a bit wonky and I've been on vacation, part of it, etc. But typically on a Sunday or a Monday, I will sit down with my list. And what I've noticed is that over time, because I'll do this on a weekly basis, I empty out all of the thoughts, is I'll have categories, right? I'll have podcast category. I will have file work. I will have webinars that I'm producing. I will have admin things like invoices and taxes and property taxes, kid items like, do my kids need to see the doctor? Do they have a school performance? Are there report cards to review? Are there parent-teacher conferences? This is, of course, during the school year. So what you'll notice is that the categories will reveal themselves. If it's the first time you're doing this exercise, then you're going to be probably putting in more work because you're creating categories. If you've done it before, what you'll find is that these items likely fall into categories. So again, just going back, your first step really is just to unload all the information from your brain. The second step is to organize everything into categories. And this is going to help you see what needs to be done. And likely you're going to have a mix of work, right? Within work, there's probably billable work. There's probably communication. There's probably non-billable. Maybe there's some business development. Maybe there's some mentoring. Maybe there's some conversations you need to have. Maybe there's invoicing. There's going to be all sorts of different categories. And so you want to think about how are you going to organize all of that material so that it looks good. And what you might be thinking about, if it's an electronic document, it's a lot easier because you're really just cutting and pasting, right? You can move things over. You can create headings. You can create categories. You can create tables. If you're doing this in some sort of an Excel spreadsheet, you can create proper spreadsheets for it. You might work with different platforms you can use. They don't come to mind right at the moment, but project management software, there's all sorts of ways you can do this. If you're doing it by hand, you might have different colors. I like to use blue pen for writing, and I do like pink pen for underlines, and I create categories. So for you, what is the visual representation of all of this? Because that's going to help you when you're creating your systems to be consistent, and that will make it easier for you, right? You're not reinventing the wheel every single time. So after you've organized, which is step 2, then we get into, it's like that next level of executive skills. We are going to prioritize. And what I think you will also do here is streamline within each of those categories. So what I have noticed, right, I've done this exercise a few times for myself and with clients, is that once you've organized the categories, you'll probably find that there's some duplication, right? If you start taking your bullet points, for example, and you make them into a list, you'll see how you can start to collapse some of them. You may have said the same thing twice. So you want to do that, right? Remove any duplication that you find within your categories. You might also think about how you have framed the bullet points. So for example, if one of your thoughts was project, right? Chances are project is actually more specific. There's a result that you're trying to reach. An example might be if I'm thinking flights, right? Maybe that's my category. I might instead write out in my list, book return flight. Let's put it that way. Something that's a little bit more specific. Book accommodation. Maybe it's book accommodation from date X to date Y. If you are dealing with emails, you might say respond to emails and then itemize, right? If you can, which of the emails you need to respond to. If you're drafting an argument, for example, you might have the stage, right? Create outline of argument. And what you're doing here is you're just giving yourself more specific instructions so that the list that you've created, right? You've gone from the generic idea to what is the thing that you need to do here, right? What do you have to action on? What do you actually have to implement in order to make this thing happen? And so you're just giving yourself that next step. This is much easier for your brain to digest. Now it has an actionable to do. And what you'll now end up with is you've got your organized categories. You're starting to describe the contents of those categories in a way that is actionable and specific and makes sense to you, right? So we just want to move away from something that's too generic. We've removed the duplication and we want to prioritize. And what that means is you're looking within each category and how do you want to prioritize it? Typically, you want urgency in there. You'll have importance in there. So rank them, give them a ranking. You can move them around quite easily. If this is an electronic document, you can put numbers next to them if you've handwritten them so that you understand, but you're really thinking through now, like what needs to happen first. And then if you really step back, because you might have multiple different categories, each of which has its own set of priorities, then what of all of these projects, of all of these different categories, what needs to happen first, right? So for me today, I was thinking about, okay, I've got a trip to Mexico. I'm leaving the house at 1. It's currently 9:07 a.m. I had to get my podcast recorded, no questions asked. So that I'm doing right now. Then I have packing. I need to have clothing to wear. Then lunch is next up on the agenda because I'd like to have something to eat because I don't know what's going to be there on the other end, etc. As I was planning, I realized I also need to write my newsletter for not next week, but the following week. So that's great. I caught something that I'd kind of lost sight of. I've already got all the lists that I'm bringing with me. So I've been organizing and reorganizing and planning and, what needs to happen for work, what needs to happen outside of work. So I'll bring that stuff with me. And so again, for you, you're wanting to think about, okay, like what are the truest priorities? What are the things that if I don't do them, bad things will happen, right? If I don't have the passport in the bag, bad things will happen, right? If you don't file the notice of civil claim on time, bad things will happen. So you get to see where the truest priorities are, and then you can base your next steps off of there. And again, what you've done is you now know what needs to happen. You know your next steps. And also what you'll start to see here is what doesn't need to be done by you, right? What can you start delegating to other people? You might notice there are things that simply are not going to get done, right? Okay, I thought this was important, but it's not. I'm not going to do it. And also now you've got that sense of there isn't anything else, right? At least for the time being, right? Something new might come toward you, in which case you can include that on the list. But the idea here is you now have a full collection. You've got a physical document that you could print or that you can hold on to, and everything that you need is there. Okay. So just to recap then, what we've done is we've taken, right, all those thoughts that were in your mind. This works if you're having a conversation. Let's say you're having a difficult conversation with a colleague, maybe somebody who reports to you, they haven't been doing work the way that you want them to. And so you've written out a list of all the things that are going on for you, right? chances are from that list, you're seeing, okay, there's really 3 things that are going on here that I need to address. So that narrows the scope of your conversation. You might see there are some nice to haves, right? That maybe you address depending on how that conversation goes. And you might see, you know what, there's some things that I really just don't need to address in this conversation. I'm going to park them and perhaps come back to them at a later day. So this process would work for that. You can also see how if you're writing an email to a client, for example, and it's a big update on a file, and you've got all these ideas, well, you write them all down, you categorize them, then you think, what does the client really need to know here? What do I need to communicate? Then you can sort through it, prioritize it, make it sound good, make it very clear what the next steps are going to be, right? Same thing for you, right? You've got a project, you've got a trip, you've got some conflicts in terms of what's happening at home and at work. How are you going to sort through that? So really this just gives you time to get organized. So you're doing the download, everything, you're emptying out the closet, the kitchen drawer, somewhere where you can see it. Next, you're organizing it. This is, you're doing the laundry. And sorry, these are all household examples, but they're just so tangible. And what we're doing here is so intangible. It helps to have a visual to represent what really is just your thoughts. So here, this is where you're sorting the laundry, right? You're putting the likes with the likes. And what that is revealing for you are the categories, right? The headings that you need to address in terms of what to do moving forward. And then from there, we're sorting, we're prioritizing, we're refining the list, right? We're removing duplication. We are phrasing each of those bullets in a way that makes a little bit more sense. Maybe not all of them, depending on the volume, but at least the ones that you're going to act on first. We're prioritizing so we know what needs to happen when. We're putting things to the future if we need to. So for example, when I was preparing for this trip, I realized yesterday there are things that are just going to be future things, right? Calling the plumber, that's a future thing. There are work emails that are future things. There are invoices that are future things. So there is a category waiting for me after all of the quesadillas and the tacos and the Frida Kahlo Museum and, assuming I survive the hot air balloon, which I'm pretty confident I will. Those are the things I now have laid out ahead of me, so I don't have to remember them during my trip. They are outside of my working memory. They are on a sheet of paper. I want the same for you, right? What are the things that you can park for later? They're not urgent. They can wait, but they're there. They're there. They're ready for you when you need them. So when you do this system, right, now you've got order, right? The jumble of thoughts are no longer a jumble of thoughts. They are a to-do list. Now, why this process works is number one, this is going to slow you down. If you sit down and do this exercise, it can be painful. I know some people really dislike doing this type of work. And I am not wired that way. And if you can function without doing this and there are no consequences to you, I'm not here to say you should do this. But if you're like me and what you really need is a system so that you can get organized and feel confident and calm moving forward, then this process forces you to sit and itemize so that everything that is on your mind is now external. And then, right, you're looking at it, it's externalized, you can see it and you can manipulate it, right? You can manipulate the information in such a way that it makes sense to you. So why is this working? Well, you've got a visual, you've got an external, you've slowed things down. You may be quite tangible, right? I know for myself, when I write things physically, when I use color in my way of recording information, when I put things into my calendars, right? I've got an electronic calendar that I use for appointments and things. I've got a physical calendar as well. That to me is very reassuring. I know where things sit, and so I can predict what a week is going to look like. And I can plan around those things. So it creates that structure. It creates that accountability. It's now predictable. I feel very confident about what is going to happen next. I feel like I'm not going to forget things, right? Because everything now is outside of my working memory. So for you, you might find it's no longer in your working memory. Your brain is freed up to do all the other things. Those open loops, right? They can close themselves because they're not sitting there saying, I have to remember, I have to remember, I have to remember. We can close them because you've now written it down somewhere. And when the inevitable happens, there's a change of plan, the taxi's late, there's another assignment, you realize you missed something, you're simply adding that onto an existing process, an existing framework, an existing schedule now, as opposed to adding it into this mix, this kind of soup or casserole of ideas that you had when you started. And because it is a process, right? We talked about writing things down on paper, creating categories, and then kind of finessing them, prioritizing them. You can do this repeatedly. And the more you do this, the more skilled you'll get at this, the better you will feel about doing it, the more confident you will feel. And now you know you can go to the process. So next time you feel overwhelmed, you know, okay, I just need to give myself a 15-minute window to sit somewhere quiet and think this through, and then I'm going to be okay, right? So when you're at work and you're feeling super stressed, you can take a time out, right? Give yourself 10 minutes just to stop and organize your thoughts, organize your mind, what needs to happen first, and then you can approach it so much more deliberately. So with that, I am going to thank you for joining me here this week. I hope this has been a helpful episode for you. I truly believe that this is one of those skills that can take you from feeling really reactive and like chaos into a much more organized and productive place. This works super well, as I said, for basically time management and project management and conversations and drafting and goal setting and all of that. And so please do, if you have questions, reach out to me because I'd love to help you figure out how to do this for yourself. I'd love to walk you through this process. A lawyer that I worked with years ago took me through this process, not because we were trying to work on time and practice management. We had a file together and we sat down to create a work plan. And it was really eye-opening for me because I basically saw into the brain of a very senior, excellent lawyer. And he basically did the equivalent of what we've just done, right? Which was taking the ideas and translating it into an actionable plan. And we followed roughly these steps. At the time, I remember thinking it was very cool. And I think I adopted that for some of the work that I do. But really, it's in the past few years when I've been coaching and really getting into executive function that I'm seeing how to dial up this process, how to look at this process, and how to use this process very practically to create the results that you're trying to create in your practice. So thank you again for joining me. Next time we meet, I will be back from Mexico and I'll tell you all about the wonderful things in Mexico City, but not too much because you're probably not signing in to hear me talk about travel. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're having a great summer. And like I said, reach out if you've got any questions. All right, take care. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.